So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing which teams I think are under the most pressure to have a good draft. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So there's a few criteria for me and a team to be under pressure to have a good draft. First, the team has to be a contender heading into next season. If a team's not a contender, I don't really see them as a team that's needing to have high pressure put on them for this year's draft. You look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, for example. While I think the team has gotten better in free agency, I don't think that the draft expectations are going to be particularly high for that team. But then you have a couple other teams like the Dolphins and the Jets. They've made big moves, but I don't see them having high draft pressure either, just because, again, I don't think they're going to be a team that's going to make a deep playoff run next year. The Dolphins might be a little bit different because I think they're a team that have made the biggest moves and can make at least a playoff run, maybe not a full run, but maybe make it to the playoffs. So the Dolphins, they have that going for them. They've made moves, but to be under pressure, at least in my eyes, you have to be a team that can make a solid Super Bowl run, make a deep playoff run, maybe even win the Super Bowl. Because so you have teams like the Bills, Broncos, Buccaneers, Rams, and Bengals. Those teams would be under or would consider or meet the criteria to be teams under pressure in my eyes heading into this year's draft. But those teams have already made the big moves in free agency. They don't really have that much pressure in my eyes in this year's draft to have a good one. I think those teams had more meaningful free agency periods this offseason to where they've addressed those needs. They're not going to be a team that going into the draft they need to hit on these draft picks. So that's the criteria. A team has to be a contender going into the playoffs, and they kind of have to be a team that have expectations heading into next season. So let's get into the three teams that I think need to have a good draft. The first team we have that I think needs to have a good draft is the Green Bay Packers. They are needing major help at the wide receiver position after losing Davante Adams in that trade with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, they did sign Sammy Watkins, but obviously I don't think Sammy Watkins is going to be that guy that's going to be their number one guy, be that, replace Davante Adams. Because you're not going to replace him, and two, with Sammy Watkins, while I like Sammy, he did great things in Kansas City, he's so injury prone that I don't know if he's going to be a reliable guy the entire season. When he is healthy, he makes impacts in games. There's no question about that. But it's just with Sammy Watkins and his injuries, I don't know if he's going to be able to make that big of a splash for the Green Bay Packers. But again, that's a good signing for them. But they still need help with the wide receiver position. They have 11 total picks in this year's draft. They have 2 first-round picks, and they gained a first-rounder in that trade with the Raiders with sending Davante Adams over to them. So they have the draft capital to have a good draft. But again, they're going in with Sammy at Watkins, Allen Lazard as their top receivers, so they don't really have that true number one guy. Allen Lazard, is probably a 3. Sammy Watkins is probably a 2. Packers need a lot of help when it comes to their wide receiver talent, and they haven't drafted a wide receiver in the first round since 2002, and so that's something that's really got to change for the Green Bay Packers. Because if we're looking at it, from an outside perspective, as an outsider of the Packers, not a fan of them, I think the wide receiver position is something they need to do and something they need massively right now. And I know Aaron Rodgers is great. He's one of the all-time greats. He's one of the best of all time, but a guy can only do so much, and having Allen Lazard, Sammy Watkins as your top 2 guys, and one guy that's not reliable to stay healthy all the time, you got to get Aaron Rodgers help. A elite quarterback can only do so much. Like, the one season I bring up is Tom Brady in his last year in New England. The fact that he did anything at all in that season is just remarkable to how great he is. I think that the Packers can make the playoffs with the current makeup of their roster because they have Aaron Rodgers, but if their goal is to win the Super Bowl, I don't think they can do it with the current layout. And another thing that I think is kind of interesting for them to have a good draft is because the conference is so weak that the Packers, they make one really good draft pick, they instantly become a top contender again just because the conference is so weak. You have the Rams and the Buccaneers right now, and you have a good draft, you're instantly back in that conversation with them. You add an elite, good young wide receiver, the Packers are instantly a team that is going to be back in that Super Bowl conversation, because I don't think that they're in it right now. But you add another receiver, they could be a great team and they could make a great playoff run, but they have to address that, and they have a great deal of expectations in this year's draft. The next team that has a lot of pressure on them is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I've already made a whole video on this one, and I won't go too long on the Chiefs, but they have a lot of holes to fill on their roster. The defensive line needs a lot of help. They need wide receiver help. They need corner help, and they kind of need depth at right tackle. So there's a lot of holes that the Chiefs have to fill, and from multiple angles, the Chiefs have a lot of pressure. They traded away Tyreek Hill. They lost out on some great defensive line players in free agency. Now, that's not completely their fault, fault. There was a lot of factors that kind of were out of their hands that kind of took that away from them. And then just the overall fact that the AFC conference and the entire AFC West has gotten better and is now probably the toughest division in the history of the NFL. It's definitely the greatest talent pool of the Mahomes era. This is the most competition that I think that since Mahomes took over for the Chiefs that the Chiefs have ever faced in a conference. So if you just looking at all those aspects, just the fact that there's so many holes on this roster that they still need to fill, and just because everybody around the Kansas City Chiefs have gotten better while they're kind of worse off than they were once the AFC Championship game ended, there's a great deal of pressure on the Chiefs right now to hit on their draft picks and to fill those really vital holes that need to be filled on this roster. And then you have the final team that has pressure on them to have a solid, good draft is the Dallas Cowboys. They may have been the team with the most disappointing offseason of any team. And in a conference and a division that is very weak right now, they may not even be the favorites in their own division. The Philadelphia Eagles might be a team that could be the favorites. I mean, that division hasn't had a back-to-back division winner in a very long time. So just, that division is as bad as it is, you can almost rely on a different division winner every single year. And it hasn't been a great offseason. They traded away Amari Cooper, and in my opinion, they scapegoated Amari Cooper for the bad season that they had. They lost Randy Gregory to the Broncos, Cedric Wilson, Connor Williams, they all signed with the Dolphins. Lyle Collins signed with the Bengals. So they lost some great players. They lost some impact players that are very vital to the success of the Dallas Cowboys last year, and they lost all those guys. So the Cowboys are in a very tough spot right now that they have holes that they need to fill as well, and they have to address those in the draft. And they have to have a good draft just because of the volume of players that they lost and just the distractions of this whole offseason with the Cowboys and just the structure makeup of their entire roster as a whole. Because you're looking at, for example, the Ezekiel Elliott contract. While I'm not going to fault Zeke Elliott for taking the money that he got, it's still one of the most mind-boggling contracts, paying a running back that much who has gotten progressively worse every single year. And you have Tony Pollard, who honestly you could argue could be playing over Zeke Elliott, getting more of those important and vital snaps for the Dallas Cowboys. And just as a whole for the Cowboys, this last few months have not been good for them, starting with the loss to the 49ers, losing key players in free agency, and now to the point where they were possibly a favorite heading into this season, but losing too many key players, and now to the point where they have to hit big on this year's draft. But those are the three teams that I think are under the most pressure this year to have a really good draft. Give me your thoughts down below. Who do you think is under the most pressure to have a good draft? And I'll see you in the next one.